I watched my husband hand the scalpel to a first-year intern, his eyes glued to a text from his mistress. He thought he was abandoning my sister to die on that operating table. I never told him the woman under the anesthesia was actually his own mother. The sharp, sterile scent of iodine and bleached hospital linens hit my senses like a physical blow, snapping my eyes open. The fluorescent lights of Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago hummed above me, casting a sickly, pale glow over the linoleum floor. For a terrifying, breathless second, I thought I was still trapped in the damp, windowless room of the psychiatric ward where I had drawn my last miserable breath. I looked down at my hands. They weren't trembling. They weren't pale and skeletal from months of forced medication and despair. They were warm, steady, and clutching a lukewarm cup of vending machine coffee. I checked the digital clock on the waiting room wall. November 12, 2024, 6 a.m. A choked gasp escaped my lips. I was back. I had returned the exact day my life was systematically dismantled. The day my younger sister, Lily, was scheduled for a complex mitral valve repair. In my previous life, this was the day my husband, Dr. Purrs, Cameron Hayes, the celebrated chief of cardiothoracic surgery, promised me he would personally handle Lily's high-risk operation. But right before the anesthesia was administered, Cameron received a text message. It was from Valerie Dupont, a wealthy hostess and, as I would later discover, Cameron's mistress of 3 years. Valerie had twisted her ankle during a tennis match and was throwing a hysterical fit, demanding Cameron's immediate presence at her penthouse. Without a second thought, Cameron had stripped off his surgical gown, handed the lead surgeon's clipboard to Dr. Riley Brooks, a dangerously underqualified first-year intern whose father sat on the hospital board and walked out the doors. Riley botched the surgery. She severed a major artery. Lily bled out on the table in less than 4 minutes. When I demanded justice, Cameron used his immense influence to falsify the autopsy report, claiming Lily had an undetectable congenital defect. When I threatened to go to the press, he used my grief against me, having me committed to a private psychiatric facility in upstate New York. I spent 2 years rotting in that cell, slowly poisoned by the heavy sedatives they forced down my throat until my heart finally gave out. But God or fate or whatever chaotic force governs the universe had pulled me back. I had woken up in my own bed exactly 12 hours before the surgery, and I hadn't wasted a single second. At 2 a.m. I had quietly transferred Lily out of Northwestern Memorial. I paid a private ambulance service a small fortune to move her to Chicago Medical Center across town, directly into the care of Dr. Alistair Grant, a brilliant and ethical surgeon who had already successfully completed her valve repair by the time the sun came up. Lily was safe, but I didn't cancel the surgery at Northwestern. Oh no, I had a much grander design in mind. Cameron was a man driven entirely by greed and status. His mother, Eleanor Hayes, was a ruthless, domineering billionaire who controlled the Hayes family trust. Eleanor despised me, but more importantly, she held Cameron's inheritance over his head like a guillotine. Coincidentally, Eleanor had been secretly flown in from Geneva the night before for a highly classified coronary artery bypass. She was registered under the VIP alias Jane Doe in operating room 4, while Lily had been scheduled for Aura 3. It only took a bribe of $20,000 to a disgruntled, soon-to-retire scheduling manager named Brenda Walsh to swap the files, the digital charts, and the room assignments. Now, the woman prepped, shaved, and heavily anesthetized on the table in OR3, the woman completely draped in blue surgical tarps with only her chest cavity exposed, was not my 22-year-old sister. It was 68-year-old Eleanor Hayes. Diana? I blinked, pulling myself out of my dark reverie. Standing before me was Cameron, He looked immaculate in his navy blue scrubs, his silver stethoscope draped casually around his neck like a trophy. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his jaw was set in that familiar, arrogant line that I had once mistaken for confidence. "Cameron," I said, forcing my voice to tremble just enough to sound like an anxious sister. "Is it time?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, feigning exhaustion. "Look, Diana, there's been a slight change of plans." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained the mask of innocent confusion. "What do you mean? You're scrubbing in, right?" "You promised Lily." Cameron checked his Rolex, a gift from Valerie, I now knew. "I have an absolute emergency. A VIP patient just came into the ER in critical condition. I'm the only one who can stabilize them. A VIP patient." Valerie's sprained ankle. The sheer audacity of his lie made my blood run cold, but I dug my nails into my palms to keep from screaming. "But Lily's procedure," I stammered, playing my part flawlessly. "It's a high-risk valve repair. You said so yourself." "And it's completely routine for our staff," Cameron lied smoothly, placing a patronizing hand on my shoulder. His touch, which used to bring me comfort, now felt like crawling insects on my skin. "I'm handing the case over to Dr. Riley Brooks. She's brilliant, top of her class at Hopkins. She'll have the attending anesthesiologist, Dr. Aris Miller, right beside her. Lily is in perfect hands." Riley Brooks, the intern who didn't even know how to properly clamp a descending aorta. Cameron was willingly throwing my sister to the wolves just so he could go play nurse to his billionaire mistress. "Are you sure, Cameron?" I whispered, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "If something goes wrong, I'd never forgive you." Cameron chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "You worry too much, Diana. It's practically a walk in the park. I'll be back before she's even in the recovery ward. Just sit tight." He leaned in and kissed my forehead. I held my breath to keep from gagging. "I love you," he murmured automatically, his eyes already shifting down to his buzzing phone. Valerie, no doubt, demanding his arrival. "I know," I replied softly. "I know exactly what you are." I watched Cameron turn on his heel and stride down the white corridor, pushing open the double doors and stepping out into the crisp November morning. He didn't look back. He was leaving my sister to die. Except it wasn't my sister. I tossed my lukewarm coffee into the trash bin, smoothed down my skirt, and walked toward the surgical observation deck. The show was about to begin. The observation gallery above operating room 3 was dark, cold, and utterly silent. I stood behind the thick, soundproof glass, looking down at the brightly lit surgical theater below. Under the glaring, multi-directional halogen lights lay the patient. Her face was completely obscured by the intubation tubes, surgical tape, and the heavy blue sterile drapes that tented over her head to separate the anesthesia workspace from the surgical field. Only a precise rectangle of pale skin on her chest was exposed, painted a deep rust orange with betadine. Even from up here, I could recognize the irony. Eleanor Hayes, the matriarch who had spent her entire life controlling everything and everyone around her, was now lying unconscious and vulnerable, completely stripped of her power, about to be operated on by a clueless 25-year-old. The double doors of the OR swung open, and Dr. Riley Brooks strutted in. Even covered in surgical scrubs, a mask, and a buffant cap, Riley's sheer arrogance radiated through the room. She was holding her sterile, gloved hands up near her chest, bantering loudly with the scrub nurse. I couldn't hear the words through the thick glass, but I could read the body language. She thought she was the star of a medical drama. She thought Cameron handing her this surgery was a testament to her prodigal talent, completely oblivious to the fact that she was merely a convenient scapegoat. Dr. Aris Miller, the senior anesthesiologist, was sitting at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on the monitors. He looked annoyed, constantly checking his watch. In my past life, Miller had been ordered by Cameron to let Riley take the lead, a directive he followed to secure his own upcoming promotion. He assumed, like everyone else, that it was just the chief's sister-in-law, on the table a disposable nobody in the grand scheme of hospital politics. I pulled out my phone and opened the GPS tracking app I had secretly installed on Cameron's phone 3 days ago. A little blue dot was moving rapidly down Lakeshore Drive, heading straight toward the Gold Coast district, straight toward Valerie Dupont's luxury high-rise. He was driving 80 miles an hour. He couldn't wait to get to her. Down in the OR, Riley held out her hand. The scrub nurse slapped a number 10 scalpel into her palm. My breath hitched. I pressed my hands flat against the cold blast. Riley leaned over the exposed chest. She didn't bother to double-check the patient's chart hanging on the wall. She didn't verify the anatomy. She just pressed the blade into the skin and drew a long, swift line down the center of Eleanor Hayes's sternum. The rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor echoed softly through the small speaker in the gallery wall. It was a steady, reassuring sound, but I knew exactly how fast that could change. I watched as the surgical saw was brought out. The brutal mechanical reality of open-heart surgery commenced. They cracked the sternum, placed the retractors, and cranked the rib cage open. "Dr. Brooks," a voice crackled through the gallery speaker. It was Dr. Miller, the anesthesiologist. "Blood pressure is dropping slightly, 90/60. Watch your margins." "I've got it, Miller." Riley's voice snapped back, laced with defensive irritation. "It's just standard bleeding, clamping the aorta now." I gripped the metal railing in front of me. This was it. This was the exact moment in my past life where everything went to hell. Riley reached into the chest cavity with a pair of heavy surgical clamps, but Eleanor's anatomy wasn't the anatomy of a 22-year-old girl. Her vessels were older, calcified, and fragile. Furthermore, Eleanor's procedure wasn't a standard mitral valve repair. She needed a highly delicate bypass. But Riley was operating under the assumption that she was performing a completely different surgery. Riley clamped down, hard. Suddenly, a bright, horrific geyser of crimson blood erupted from the surgical field, splashing violently against Riley's transparent face shield and painting the front of her sterile gown red. The steady beep, beep, beep of the monitor instantly transformed into a frantic, high-pitched beep, 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 beep. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa," Miller shouted, leaping up from his stool, his laid-back demeanor vanishing in a second. "Pressure is tanking, 60/40. "What did you just do, Brooks?" "I don't know," Riley shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. She dropped the clamps and frantically plunged her hands into the pooling blood, trying to find the source of the rupture blindly. "She's hemorrhaging. I can't see anything." "Suction. Get me more suction." "You tore the ascending aorta," Miller roared. "Code blue. Page Dr. Hayes, get the chief of surgery down here right fucking now." The circulating nurse sprinted to the wall phone. "I'm paging Dr. Hayes." He's not responding. Of course he's not, I thought, a cold, dark smile spreading across my lips. He's currently pouring champagne for a woman who faked a limp. "Pressure is 40/20. She's coding," Miller yelled, pushing a syringe of epinephrine into the IV line. "Brooks, compress the artery. Use your fingers." "Do something," but Riley was completely frozen. She stood at the side of the table, her blood-soaked hands hovering in the air, her chest heaving as she stared at the catastrophic mess she had made. The sheer reality of her incompetence had finally crushed her ego. She was watching a life drain away, and she had absolutely no idea how to stop it. I can't," Riley sobbed, stepping back from the table. There's too much blood. Get out of the way." Miller pushed her aside, plunging his own hands into the chest cavity. But he was an anesthesiologist, not a cardiothoracic surgeon. He was trying to stop a dam from bursting with a piece of tape. The piercing, continuous wail of the flat lines suddenly tore through the room. B, E, E. It was the exact same sound that had haunted my nightmares for 2 years. The sound that had heralded the end of my sister's life. The sound that had shattered my world. But right now, echoing through the cold observation gallery, it sounded like a symphony. "Time of death," Dr. Miller panted, stepping back from the table, his gloves dripping with dark red blood. He looked up at the clock, his face pale and devastated. 8:14 a.m. Silence descended upon the operating room, heavy and suffocating. Riley Brooks sank to the floor, burying her face in her hands, weeping hysterically. I took a deep breath, smoothing my expression into one of tragic ignorance, and turned away from the glass. I walked out of the gallery and made my way down to the surgical waiting area, taking a seat on the uncomfortable vinyl chairs. 10 minutes later, the double doors slowly pushed open. Dr. Miller walked out. He had removed his bloody gown, but his scrubs were still stained. He looked exhausted, visibly shaking as he approached me. He held his surgical cap in his hands, twisting the fabric nervously. He thought he was walking toward the grieving sister of a 22-year-old girl. He had no idea he was about to set off a chain of events that would obliterate the most powerful family in Chicago. "Mrs. Hayes?" Dr. Miller said softly, his voice trembling. I stood up, clutching my purse to my chest, letting my eyes go wide with fabricated terror. "Dr. Miller? Where is Cameron? Is Lily okay?" Miller swallowed hard, looking at the floor. "Mrs. Hayes, Diana. I am so incredibly sorry. There was an unforeseen complication, a catastrophic rupture. We did everything we could." "No," I whispered, forcing a tear to spill over my eyelashes. "No, you're lying. Cameron said it was routine." "Dr. Hayes wasn't in the room," Miller confessed, the guilt eating him alive. "He left the surgery to Dr. Brooks. We couldn't stop the bleeding. I'm so sorry, Diana. Your sister didn't make it." I brought a hand to my mouth, letting out a shattered, dramatic sob. I collapsed back into the chair, burying my face in my hands, crying loud, agonizing tears that echoed down the quiet hallway. But behind the shield of my hands, my lips were curved into a vicious, triumphant smile. "Oh, Cameron," I thought, pulling my phone from my pocket and staring at the blue dot that was now stationary at Valerie's address. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done." For 3 agonizing hours, I sat in that sterile waiting room, playing the role of the shattered sister to absolute perfection. I wept until my eyes were bloodshot and my throat felt like sandpaper. Hospital staff cast me pitying glances as they hurried past. I was a ghost to them, a tragic casualty of modern medicine. At exactly 11:42 a.m., the double doors at the end of the corridor slammed open. Cameron jogged toward me, his face twisted into a mask of breathless concern. He had changed out of his scrubs and was back in his tailored Armani suit. As he knelt in front of my chair, pulling me into a tight embrace, the cloying scent of Tom Ford's Black Orchid, Valerie DuPont's signature perfume, wafted off his collar, completely overpowering the smell of hospital bleach. "Diana, my God, I just heard," he breathed, his voice thick with practiced sorrow. "I am so incredibly sorry. I got here as fast as I could." I buried my face in his chest, hiding my revulsion. "You promised me, Cameron," I sobbed, pounding my fists weakly against his lapels. "You promised you'd take care of her." He caught my wrists, squeezing them with a patronizing firmness. "I know, sweetheart, I know. But you have to understand, this wasn't Riley's fault. I just spoke with Dr. Miller." Lily had a massive, undetectable congenital defect in her aortic wall. It was a ticking time bomb. Even if I had been in that room, there was nothing anyone could have done. It was the exact same lie, verbatim. The rehearsed bulletproof excuse he had used to gaslight me in my previous life. Hearing it again didn't evoke sadness. It ignited a cold, hard fury deep within my chest. "I want to see her," I whispered, pulling away from him. "Take me to her, Cameron." Cameron sighed, a flicker of annoyance passing behind his dark eyes. He didn't want to deal with a grieving relative. He wanted to forge the death certificate, bury the mistake, and go back to his comfortable life. "Diana, that's not a good idea. The trauma. It's better you remember her as she was." "Take me to the morgue," I demanded, letting my voice sharpen just enough to slice through his fake empathy. "Now," reluctantly, Cameron nodded. He guided me down to the basement levels, his arm wrapped tight around my waist, playing the supportive husband. Waiting for us outside the cold storage autopsy suite was Dr. Tu, Miller, and Ryder Bingham, the hospital's chief administrator. Bingham looked pale and sweating, already calculating the PR nightmare of a young woman dying on their premier surgical floor. "Dr. Hayes, Mrs. Butt." "Hayes," Bingham muttered, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "A terrible tragedy. We are conducting a full internal review, but as Cameron said, the chart indicates—" "I just want to see my sister," I interrupted, my voice deadpan. The morgue attendant, a heavy-set man named Adrian Jameson, nodded grimly. He turned to the stainless steel wall of refrigerated compartments and gripped the heavy latch of door 4B. The metallic clatter echoed sharply in the freezing room. He pulled a sliding tray out. A body lay atop the steel, covered in a pristine, heavy white sheet. Cameron stepped forward, taking the lead. He assumed his solemn, authoritative posture, preparing to visually identify a 22-year-old girl and officially close the book on this disastrous morning. "Ready?" Adrian asked softly. "Go ahead," Cameron commanded. Adrian pulled the white sheet back to the collarbone. For a second, absolute silence reigned in the freezing room. The hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly sounded as loud as a jet engine. The woman on the table did not have Lily's flowing blonde hair or her youthful pale skin. The woman on the table had coarse silver hair, deep wrinkles framing a sharp aristocratic jawline, and a familiar, unyielding expression that even death couldn't soften. It was Eleanor Hayes, billionaire matriarch, and Cameron's mother. "What?" Cameron choked out. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly, translucent white. He stumbled backward, his polished Italian leather shoes slipping on the linoleum tiles. "What is this? Who is this?" "That is the patient from operating room 3, Adrian stated, looking at his clipboard, clearly confused by the chief of surgery's reaction. "Jane Doe, brought down at 8:45 a.m. "No!" Cameron screamed, his voice cracking violently. He lunged at the table, gripping the icy edges of the steel tray. He stared down at the lifeless face of his mother, his chest heaving as if he couldn't draw oxygen into his lungs. "No, no, no, this is a mistake. My mother was in VIP R4. She was having a bypass with Dr. Henderson. What is she doing here?" Bingham, the administrator, froze. "Eleanor Hayes?" "Cameron, what are you talking about? VIP OR4 has been empty all morning." Henderson called in sick. Cameron's eyes darted frantically around the room, wide and manic with rising terror. He looked at Dr. Miller, who was now trembling uncontrollably in the corner. He looked at Bingham. Finally, his terrified gaze landed on me. I wasn't crying anymore. I stood perfectly still, my arms crossed over my chest, staring at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated ice. "Diana," Cameron gasped, pointing a shaking finger at the corpse. Where is Lily? Where is your sister? Lily, I repeated, my voice echoing clearly off the tile walls. I offered him a small, vicious smile. Lily is resting comfortably in the cardiac recovery ward at Chicago Medical Center. Dr. Alistair Grant performed her valve repair at 4 a.m. She's expected to make a full recovery. The words hit Cameron like physical bullets. He staggered back, grabbing the edge of a nearby counter to keep from collapsing. You, he whispered, the horrifying realization finally clicking into place behind his eyes. You swapped the charts. Yeah, I just moved some files around, I replied coolly, stepping closer to him. The scent of his expensive cologne was now soured by the sharp stench of his own panicked sweat. But I didn't kill her, Cameron. You did. This is insane, Cameron roared, his panic giving way to blind rage. He lunged toward me, but Adrian Jameson and Ryder Bingham quickly stepped in between us, shoving him back. Think about it, Cameron, I said, my voice eerily calm. You signed the surgical orders. You prepped the room. And then, when your own mother was lying unconscious on the table, desperately needing your expertise, you abandoned her. You handed the scalpel to a first-year intern who didn't know an aorta from a pulmonary vein, all so you could go play house with Valerie DuPont. Oh, Bingham let out a strangled gasp. Valerie DuPont? Cameron, you left the hospital during a critical procedure to see your mistress? Shut up. Cameron screamed at Bingham, spittle flying from his lips. He turned his wild eyes back to me. I'll kill you, Diana. I will ruin you. You're going to prison for murder. For what? I laughed softly. I'm not a doctor. I wasn't in the operating room. I didn't slice open Eleanor's ascending aorta and watch her bleed out. The hospital logs will show that Brenda Walsh, who coincidentally caught a flight to Costa Rica 2 hours ago, made a scheduling error. A tragic administrative mix-up, but the medical negligence. The gross abandonment of a patient? That's all on you, Doctor. Right on cue, the heavy doors of the morgue swung open again. 2 uniformed Chicago police officers stepped inside, followed closely by Detective Gregory Wyatt, a no-nonsense investigator from the precinct. Dr. Cameron Hayes? Detective Wyatt asked, holding up a sleek black tablet. Detective, thank God. Cameron shouted, pointing desperately at me. Arrest her. My wife fabricated medical documents. She orchestrated the murder of my mother. Wyatt barely glanced at me. He looked at Cameron with an expression of utter disgust. We just finished interviewing Dr. Riley Brooks and Dr. Haup. Aris Miller. Dr. Brooks provided us with a rather damning statement, as well as the hospital's internal CCTV footage. It shows you leaving the surgical floor at 7:15 a.m., getting into your vehicle, and driving away. But Wyatt stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. We also have a warrant for your cell phone, which I assume will confirm your location at Ms. DuPont's residence at the time of your mother's death. Dr. Hayes, you are under arrest for gross medical negligence, involuntary manslaughter, and reckless endangerment. No, Cameron thrashed wildly as the 2 uniformed officers grabbed his arms, slamming him roughly against the tiled wall to cuff his wrists. You don't understand. She set me up. I am the chief of surgery. I am a Hayes. I own this hospital. Not anymore, you don't, Bingham interjected, his voice shaking but firm. As of this moment, Cameron, your privileges are revoked. And considering Eleanor's strict morality clause in the family trust, I imagine the board will be seizing your assets by nightfall to cover the impending lawsuits. That was the final blow. The Slayer statute was a well-known legal doctrine in Illinois. A person cannot inherit property from someone they murdered or caused the death of. By abandoning his post and directly causing Eleanor's death through gross negligence, Cameron had effectively written himself out of his mother's billion-dollar empire. He had lost his career, his freedom, and his entire fortune in a single morning. As the officers dragged a screaming, violently sobbing Cameron toward the door, I stepped right into his path, forcing them to pause. I leaned in close until my lips were merely inches from his ear. I looked deep into his terrified, broken eyes. "This is for the 2 years I spent rotting in a padded cell while you lived off my sister's blood," I whispered, the venom in my voice meant for him and him alone. "Enjoy hell, Cameron. I hear the food is terrible." I pulled back and nodded to the officers. They yanked him through the doors, his desperate, pathetic screams echoing down the basement hallway until they faded into nothingness. I turned away from the steel tray, ignoring the shocked, silent stares of Dr. Miller and Administrator Bingham. I walked out of the morgue, out of the suffocating basement, and pushed through the main lobby doors of Northwestern Memorial. The crisp, freezing wind of the Chicago morning hit my face. It smelled like exhaust fumes, roasting nuts, and cold lake water. But to me, as I hailed a cab to go meet my living, breathing sister, it smelled exactly like freedom. Thank you so much for reading this twisted tale of betrayal and ultimate revenge. If you loved seeing Cameron finally get the karma he deserved, please hit that like button and share this story with your friends who love a good payback plot. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more daily reborn drama, gripping true-life stories and shocking plot twists. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done in Diana's shoes?